Welcome to Chapter and Verse. I'm Rick Bleiweiss. I'm the author of 𝐬𝐻𝐭, 𝐬𝐮𝐻𝐿 and the Barbershop Detectives, a historical fiction mystery that's coming out in February. And I'm here to have a wonderful conversation with the fabulous Susan Purvis, who is the author of Go Find, but that's not the only thing she is. Susan's an outdoor aficionado, an educator, a world traveler. I mean, she has been in some of the highest, lowest, coldest, hottest places on the planet, been with indigenous cultures. I mean, a fascinating human being. And so, hi, Susan.
And the stories just keep getting better and better, right?
Exactly. So, you know, before we talk about your best-selling book, Go Find, and the process of writing it and everything, for people who don't know you, tell us more about you than what I just summarized.
Well, interestingly enough, I grew up on the southern shore of Lake Superior in northern Michigan, and my dad was a fisheries biologist, and my mom was a homemaker.
Oh.
And I think even by the third grade, I knew I didn't want my mother's life. She was raising 3 bratty kids. I was in playpens. She was cooking and doing the wash. Interestingly enough, right before my book was published, we'll say like in 2017, I finally told her that I never wanted her life.
Oh,
and, which, as writers, and we're trying to tell our truth, I held that secret for so long. And she looks at, you want to know what she said? She looked at me and she goes, well, I didn't want that life either.
That happens.
Yeah. So that's like one of my truths. I like held on to that truth because I was too afraid to tell her. And then like, she didn't even care. It was like her truth back at me. So I think in a way, even though my mom didn't live in the outdoors, she was my #1 cheerleader to say, go out and live this big, beautiful life. Don't get stuck raising kids and being a subordinate to a husband and not have your own money. And so I got hooked on the outdoors, being with my dad. But, I hung out with a gaggle of girls in junior high and high school. And we just started going on these adventures, whether we were canoeing or backpacking or biking on 10 speeds back in, the 70s.
Right. And
a trip to Montana really changed my life because it's where, when I went backpacking for a month with my family and friends, and, I couldn't lean on my mom and say, oh, tie my shoe, or can you hand me the Captain Crunch out of the cupboard. I had to go, put my big girl pants on and learn how to be independent and confident as a young 15-year-old woman. And that's when I went, okay, like this, I know where I'm going. So I went to college at the University of Montana when I was 17, and really I haven't looked back.
Cool. And so I understand that you were a geologist in gold prospecting.
Yes. So I got a degree in geology, because, so in the early to mid 80s, what professions did women have other than being a teacher, a nurse, a secretary? And and then it's like, well, what do women do in the outdoors? And I started taking geology classes and I thought, wow, I want to work outside. And I didn't know where that would lead me, but eventually it led me to gold exploration, probably because I could make a lot of money. And really, we got to travel around the world. And I met my husband skiing, who was also a geologist, and we ended up running an international gold exploration office in the Dominican Republic.
Really?
Yeah, so we just landed in the Dominican Republic. I didn't speak a lick of Spanish. I took German in high school, so I had no romantic language skill set. And off we went running this program in Latin America where it's really corrupt and difficult to work in, and we could live anywhere. So this kind of goes to my book. I wanted to live at the last great Colorado ski town, which was Crested Butte, Colorado. So our house was at 9,500 feet. So I like to say I had 1 foot in the snow and I had 1 foot in the mud in the Dominican Republic looking for gold.
Wow, cool. So then how did you transition to doing the avalanche rescue and other things that you did with your lab.
Yeah, my black lab.
Yes.
Not my science lab, my black lab.
Black lab. I should have meant Labrador Retriever. Yes.
Yeah. Well, when I was working in the Dominican Republic, something was missing in my life. And I was 33. So this is, for your audience, there's a lot of people sitting around going, what am I doing? What am I doing in this commute? What am I doing in this office? This is not my purpose and my passion. And I remember I was just sweating in the bugs. My only friends were the campesinos, and I couldn't really speak to them. And I was so lonely. And I was newly married, but my relationship was not right with my husband. And I remember screaming at the sky going, what am I going to do? I have to change something. And I said, I'm going to get on the gnarliest ski patrol in North America, which was in Crested Butte. And I want to make a living on my skis, saving lives. Okay. So the moment I'm in the ski patrol school, I'm one of two women. I'm like 5'4". I was probably 100 pounds back then. And I'm competing against these 6'6", 300-pound guys.
Right.
For a spot on the ski patrol. But it was in ski patrol school during this 100-inch snowstorm.
Wow.
Where I learned about an avalanche that happened across the street.
Okay.
And it was a Sunday morning, bluebird day, no wind. 3 little toddlers, 6, 6, and 4 years old from Houston, Texas, were out playing in front of the condominium, waiting for the shuttle bus to bring the whole family back to Dallas, Texas, where they lived. When out of nowhere, the dad who was loading up the luggage in the shuttle bus looked up, and a wall of snow came down. It was an avalanche and buried all 3 toddlers.
Wow.
Can you imagine?
What? No, I can't imagine. No.
And the year was 1989. And, they didn't have an intact search and rescue team. So people just showed up, the fire department, they used pool hooks, brooms, hockey sticks, whatever they could find to try to probe for these toddlers that were completely buried. And the ski patrol at the time had a trained avalanche dog. And so the trained avalanche dog came across the street and started looking for the children. And I kept leaning in going, oh my God, really? Like I hadn't even heard about avalanche dogs. I'm like, wow. I'm like, what happened? They're like, well, the dog couldn't find the kid. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And I kept saying, why? Right. Like, isn't that the dog's only job is to find, humans under the snow? And the answer they gave me wasn't good enough. And you know how you walk through life and you just can't even predict this stuff. Like something starts nagging at you and you're like, all right, I'm going to change that. So that night when it was snowing 100 inches out, I walked up that same road where the kids were buried. The town hadn't done any mitigation. So all those tourists were still in their kitchens cooking. I mean, this avalanche comes through the condominium. And I just got so mad. And I'm like, I said to myself, what if I got a dog and trained it to save lives, vowing to never leave anyone behind? So that was my honor, my pledge to myself.
Wow.
It was also the same year I said to my husband, till death do us part. Okay. Ooh, what a cliffhanger, right?
Yeah, right. So from there, did you just go and find the dog, or was that the next step?
Yeah, the next step was getting a puppy. And you have to remember, I was commuting 2,000 miles, 1 foot in the snow, 1 foot in the mud. And I just said, I don't care. I woke up on a whim. It's kind of like, let's have a baby. I'm like, no, I'm going to get a puppy dog. We have to go right now. Because if I didn't, life would take me in another direction. So I just want to go back to the book writing process, because when you set out to write a book, and I had some great mentors along the way, but I have these great opening scenes. It could have been the avalanche burial with the 3 kids, but actually I bookended my book where I started out with this really high risk mission at the end of my dog's career.
Okay.
But when I was going through the writing process, which can be very difficult, I had a mentor who said, Sue, we've got to introduce your main character, which is my dog. So we have to start your next chapter, chapter 2,
Right.
has to be the introduction of your main character, which is my rebellious, troublesome little black lab who had an insatiable appetite and always got into trouble.
Which is a great quality in a dog, actually.
And it's cute, isn't it?
So what made you want to write a book at the time that you did write it? Was there something that said, okay, now's the time to write this book as opposed to before or later?
You know, ever since I was probably in 3rd grade, I knew I was going to write a book. And for your listeners out there, I never, in my teens, 20s, and 30s, I never felt I had the writing chops. As a matter of fact, I kind of flunked out of high school English. I never went, right? So I had no confidence. I had no skill set. I'm like, there's no way I can make a living as a writer, even though I wanted to write. So I had to go make money because I was a poor, 20-year-old.
Right.
So finally, when I was working with my dog and I would get interviewed, because everybody loves a great dog story, I thought, God, I should be writing my own stories. And then when she died, I realized I have to tell our story, because it's not even just about the training and deploying and having this relationship with this little black lab, but it's also a woman, myself, finding my way in small town politics, a misogynistic mountain community, managing my relationship with my husband and these jobs. I felt like I was on a twister board being pulled in many, many directions.
Yeah, well, if I'm not mistaken, weren't you like the only woman doing this in a male-dominated field, basically?
Yes, in my community, yes, for sure. Like I was, kind of a maverick in a lot of ways. And everybody wanted me to fail.
Wow.
And my passion and purpose was so strong that nobody was going to let me fail. And when you have that conviction, it's not always a good thing, right? Bad things happen with it. I wasn't, people started to hate me, there was just a lot of contention in trying to, achieve a goal. And for men, it might not be the same, but for me, I had a lot of battles to fight.
Oh, I could imagine. How long did it take you to write the book?
Oh, I think from start to the publish day,
There it is.
a decade.
I'm sorry, say again?
10 years.
10 years. Okay. And did you have beta readers along the way? What was your process in writing it? Did you outline it? Did you do stream of consciousness? How did you create the book?
Thank you. That's a really great question. Well, I left Colorado, and my husband and I and my dog, who was retired, were like, we're going to move to Montana. I'm going to rekindle my relationship with my husband, and I'm going to sit down and write a book. Like, how perfect, because you have to be able to create space and live more simply to write a book, because time is money.
Yep.
And so I came to Montana, and the community I showed up at it, which is the Flathead Valley in North Montana, it had an established writing group for 20 years.
Wow.
And they had a 20-year conference going. It's called the Flathead River Writers Conference.
Okay.
And I went to the first conference, and I'm like, oh my God, my people are here. Kind of like in dog training, I had to surround myself with dog handlers and search and rescue people. And in the book process, I'm like, I'm around writers, and I started studying the craft of writing. And luckily on that first conference, I met a man named Larry Brooks who talked about story structure.
Okay.
And without it, I'd probably still be writing in circles. So I'm a huge fan story structure. And, you know, I use like the 6 poles of a tent, right? The inciting incident, you know, the midpoint, the resolution, and there's some other points in there in between. And, you know, I always had to just ask myself the fundamental question in my book writing process: could I train a dog to save a life?
Okay.
So everything always went back to, you know, that and all the conflict, right? The first half of the book is all about the conflict, right?
Right.
And then the last part is, you know, I'm the warrior. So I like to say orphan, wanderer, warrior, and martyr, right? So there's a lot of different ways. So having story structure set me on my way. And then I got into a writing group, a critique group, and we met like every week for probably 8 years. We were pretty diligent.
I was in one of those as well. They're fabulous for authors to be part of.
Yes. You have to surround yourself with writers and get honest feedback. It's like, what? This doesn't make sense. You aren't telling us what you shouldn't. You know, they're the people that bring you to the mat.
Right. Yes, absolutely. So then, as you're writing the book, where in the process of writing it did you get an agent or get it seen? Was that after you had finished it? Was it along the way on a proposal? Or how did you go from here I am writing a book in Montana to now I want to get this thing published?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, in the group I was with, no one really had a success story like I'm about to have, right? Okay. So nobody could really navigate that part. So I knew I needed to prove to myself I could write this manuscript that was like 400 and some pages. And I thought, oh, it's in pretty good shape. Well, I went to the Banff International Film and Book Festival, because it's 5 hours up the road. And I learned when I was there that they had a 21-day writing workshop for outdoor writers.
Really? Oh, cool.
Yeah. And they only select 6 people around the world a year. And I sent my first 10 pages, and my mentor, he worked for Random House in London for 40 years. So he was an editor.
Okay. And
he wrote me back and he's like, Sue, you're in, and send me the rest of the manuscript. So he read it before I went to the 21-day program. And I got a lot of great feedback. And he, you know, that group of people cleaned up my book. We got more of my story structure in line. And then I'm like, okay, so now what? Right. Okay, I got this manuscript. And he's like, well, you need to go get an agent.
Right.
I'm like, okay. So here's a little tidbit of a pearl for your listeners. Again, it's all about your association and who you know. So the woman I was in the workshop with, she has her PhD in literature. She's a prolific writer. She came to my hometown, and the two of us spoke, and so did this other gentleman at a book festival.
Okay. And
this other gentleman said, Sue, why don't you send your manuscript to my agent? He's in New York City. And I'm like, I mean, he didn't know me from Adam, and he hadn't even seen the work I'd done. And I'm like, really? You would do that for me? He goes, absolutely. He goes, Angie, who has her PhD, said, you're fabulous. So I sent, I don't know, the first 3 chapters off to this agent. I just wrote him a note. So I didn't do anything that you're supposed to do, right? I didn't do a book proposal. I didn't query anybody.
Right.
I just had a contact, and he got back to me and said, send me the rest of it. And I did, and I waited. Oh, the waiting process.
Oh, yes.
So he calls me back 3 months later, and he says, all right, Sue, I've got 5 pages of notes just when you think you're done, right?
Of course.
And he goes, I want you to read these notes. And if you agree, get back to me.
You're right.
And so I read his notes and I went, You know, one of his biggest complaints and a great lesson is he goes, you know what? You're kind of 70% really bitchy and not taking ownership. And you got to even it out to 50-50.
Okay.
Right? And I went, yeah, you know, because when we write, it's kind of, sometimes it's the bitch session, right? Where just like, look what they did to me, la, 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 I'm such the victim. And the reality is, you know, I'm 50% of the problem as well. Right? So what he did was he made me go back and, you know, looking at it now, what I could have said or should have done, you know, for all these little pearls and lessons learned. So I agreed to his terms. I agreed to everything he said. I fixed all of his comments, and I think he sold it to Blackstone within a couple of weeks.
Wow, that's cool. And so you didn't look for a different agent. And this sounds like there was no reason to.
Can I share a really beautiful story?
Absolutely.
When I got on the phone with him, he, for the first time, he started crying. This is a grown 60-something-year-old man. And I'm like, Bob, are you crying? And he's like, he was so touched by my relationship with Tasha and the work we did that I knew he was all in. And that means a lot, because it just takes one person to be all in, and then you can kind of sail through this process.
Cool. Well, you know, your story, the story you just told about how this came about, it reinforces something that I say on social media to aspiring writers, that you've got to do more than just sit in your house and write your book. You need to network, you need to go to conferences, you need to put yourself out there, be among other writers, and you never know where it's going to lead. And you're the perfect example of where it can lead.
Yeah. So today I just got an email from a writer. I don't know her. She's like, Sue, she just moved to this valley. She's like, I just finished my manuscript. Will you help me find an agent? And tonight, every Thursday night, we meet authors of the Flathead like I did 13 years ago. And I'm like, you need to come down and sit your butt in this room with these other writers. And you don't know where this is going to go.
That's right. Absolutely.
And if she's serious, she'll be there.
Yeah. No, I certainly hope she'll be there for her sake. Yeah, absolutely. And you did break the mold. I mean, you certainly, with no query letter, you know, I mean, it's like you did it really well. Really well.
Then I had to go back and do the book proposal because, you know, now Blackstone's asking me, well, who's your target audience? And, you know, so at some point you have to do all of that. I didn't do it beforehand because sometimes you just don't even know the answer to some of this stuff.
And I'm assuming that once Blackstone took it on, we assigned a developmental editor to it to work with you, or was it not needed?
Well, it turned out my agent also was an editor at Simon & Schuster for 20 years. So he really cleaned it up. There was just very little, but I did get assigned an editor. And it was great. She had been one of the Blackstone editors. She lived in New York City, never had a car, never really left the city. She had no idea about my world. So, you know, I had to like slow it down sometimes, you know, and explain a little bit more clear what I'm talking about.
Yes, no, I get it. I get it. Yeah. So you've also, if I'm not mistaken, narrated your own audiobook, correct?
I did. And
what was that like?
Well, I had to try out.
Okay.
So I want to tell you this story. So the word was, I could read my book, and I thought, I'm going to do it. But first I had to try out because Blackstone is the best, right? And I went on a ski trip, 7 hours in a car with studded snow tires. And my friend, who's older than me and couldn't hear in that ear, I said, we're going to go on this ski trip. And for 7 hours, I'm going to read my memoir to you out loud, right?
Right.
Both ways. So I'm like, blah, 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 you know, like I'm screaming through the car. So then like 2 days after I got back, I'm going to meet with Jamie Matler. So not only is she the audio engineer, but she's also a coach and a director. She's like she was perfect. So I get on and she's like, read me the part of your book. And I'm like, you know, I'm full of animation and I'm screaming at her. And she's like, Sue, you're going to be like this far from the microphone.
Right.
And I'm stumbling and mumbling. And she's like, oh, I don't know. And I'm like, please, like, give me some homework. So she gave me some homework. She told me to listen to like 7 audiobooks, her favorite. Okay. And then don't read my stuff, read somebody else's stuff, like an hour a day.
Okay.
We were going to loop back like in another 2 weeks. So I met her again and I still kind of mumbled and fumbled. She's like, right? Because her reputation's on the line.
Yes. And
then I'm like, let me practice a little bit more. So I met her again like in 2 weeks and she goes, all right, I'll take you on. You're going to be my little project.
Oh, good.
So I was able, Blackstone sent me to New York City, both for the book expo, right. And I stayed in that studio and narrated my audiobook.
And how long did it take you?
Well, let's see, I started on a Monday morning and I think my flight was for Friday. They're like, oh, you can get this done in just a few days. Kind of like writing a book, right? It should only take me a couple months to write a book. After the first day, I was only on page 17. And my book's like 400 pages. I'm like, there's no way I'm going to get this done. So, and then what I learned in the audio narration part is, you know, Blackstone is so meticulous and so good that they take our copy in New York City and send it to Oregon. Yes. And I think 2 more people listen and read. Yep. And then they send back the corrections that I have to redo. So right. We do that twice a day. And I went, whoa, I didn't even realize that they could edit and cut. Because like, how am I going to read this without mistakes? So they were, you know, just a fabulous team to work with. So I ended up, I think, changing my flight twice. We had to come in on Saturday and we had to come in on Sunday morning to get those final edits. But I sat there for 40 hours for a 13-hour book. Oh, I totally believe that. In fact, I think you did very well because many authors who read their own audiobooks are like 5 to 6 hours for a finished hour. I think you did quite well. Yeah, I heard I did quite well. But a memoir probably is easier than a novel, right? Well, it's also interesting because consumer surveys that are conducted by the Audio Publishers Association and others, they're finding that audiobook listeners are very sophisticated in the narrators that they're listening to, and that in fiction, they really want it read by a professional narrator. But in nonfiction, they'll cut authors slack because it's the author's story. So yeah, I agree with you. It's way better in nonfiction for an author to read their book, and they bring a credibility to it. Right. Yeah. So did you have any other funny incidents that took place during the, or just the whole thing was an interesting incident? You know, narrating, yeah. I have so much respect for, you know, audiobook production. And I could see, you know, really the engineer is the only person in the room besides the reader. Right. And they're just kind of get through their job. And I got like the extra special, I got I call the red carpet treatment because I had Jamie and she cared. She was invested in me, and she's like, "Stop! You've got to, punch that up." And we would,
Right.
some lines I would read 12 times because it wasn't good enough. She'd be like, "Do it again, do it again," and I'm like, "No," and she'd like, "Do it again," until we would get it right. And I wouldn't imagine, other organizations, their engineers just like doing their job, and they don't really care what the
Yeah.
author's saying.
Well, having, in full transparency to everybody that's watching, I do work for Blackstone in addition to being an author, and I've been there 15 years. And I would just say that one of the things that has always pleased me about working in the environment is the dedication to quality. I think it's one of Blackstone's hallmarks that they care about that.
Yeah. And I can notice their brand now. I can say, "Oh, just on a print book. Ooh, that's a Blackstone book."
Yeah.
I see
Yeah.
it. Their
So,
books are beautiful.
is there anything in retrospect you would have done differently in the writing of the book? Or you just totally loved the way it came out? You wouldn't change a word of it at this point?
My advice is, like anything, if you've got money, hire a coach,
Okay.
because it's painstakingly difficult. Like if you're, either you're like a really good writer over here, or you have a really good story.
Right.
So I wasn't a really good writer, but I had a really good story. And so I needed help. If I had enough money to hire like somebody, to help me write it while I'm acting it out, that
Right.
could have probably sped up the process. But having said that, it does take time for all this stuff for you to find your way in your storytelling, because you don't even really know what the book's about until you go through a couple of
Yeah, absolutely.
drafts.
Yeah. So do you have another book that you're writing? Is there a follow-up to it, or a totally different book? Or is it once is enough? Or where are
Well,
you with that?
yeah. Well, I could really be cranking out the children's books because, from the dog's perspective, I have, so many stories. The other one, I either want to write the things that, the book called The Things I Do for Money, all these crazy jobs I've had around the world, which we haven't even really had a chance to talk about. So those are some ideas that I'm working on, or some big adventure memoir now too, of what I've learned traveling and the places I've been.
Oh, that's cool. It'd be a
Yeah.
fascinating book.
Yeah.
So talk about some of those. You said you haven't spoken about some of the things you've done around the world. Talk about them.
Well, interestingly enough, part of my finding my independence when I was actually in high school, for my 16th birthday, I told my parents I wanted a 10 speed, and I just got on my bike, and I think I went for a 100-mile bike ride.
Right.
And then when I was in college, I said, I was broke. I'm like, I think I'm gonna ride my bike from Montana to Alaska one summer, because I could just camp and bike.
Wow.
And then from there, I went, I got on after I graduated from college. I said, I'm going to ride my bike around Australia and New Zealand. I didn't get around Australia. I started biking in Australia, and I said, oh my God, this place is too big. So I just found my independence, back that was like, I was on $7 a day budget. I would eat a bag of kiwi fruit. I could camp anywhere. No one was going to mug me or rape me. I don't know if I could do that now. I mean, the things, just hitchhiking across Canada with my bike because I had to get home. I'm just like, my poor parents, right?
Yeah.
But part of the journey I went on when I got into my search and rescue career is I became a wilderness medicine specialist. So I finally phased out of geology and started teaching wilderness medicine and teaching people to be leaders and risk managers. And so I've been asked to be a medic in the hottest place on earth, the coldest place on earth. And I started a high altitude medical school for the Sherpas who climb Mount Everest and the Africans who climb Mount Kilimanjaro.
Wow.
So my way to give back, because I can, is to, teach people how their body works, so they can help others and help themselves and help their families. So I've done probably 7 courses in the Mount Everest region over the years. And that gives me joy.
I bet it does. Totally bet it does. So I understand, I'm just looking at some notes that I made. So I understand that you've come to the attention of the Oprah show. You've been in some way involved with the U.S. Secret Service, the FBI, and the Navy SEALs. I'm assuming that's all search and rescue. It's in print, so I mean, I'm going to say something. But also the Smithsonian, and I mean, National Geographic. I mean, it's just, wow, fascinating life, Susan.
Well, and also I'm like, darn it, I want a story in the New York Times.
Okay.
I finally got one in.
All right.
So you guys know you can do 100-word essay, tiny love stories, and they loved mine and they printed it, and then it went into a book. So heck yeah, right?
That's
so I've had a company for almost 25 years, and I teach wilderness medicine and avalanche courses. So I've had all these people come to my courses, right? And most recently, the Navy SEALs. So I'm a chick teaching all these dudes. I'm the only chick teaching these guys. It's a lot of fun, right?
Yeah, I bet it is. A different life experience.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, it's fascinating. And so, what's in the Smithsonian?
No, I did I went on a writing assignment after college. My friend was the writer, and we flew his Cessna 177 from Montana to the Amazon and back to report on the Amazon.
Wow.
And so, yeah, that was quite, I mean, I haven't even talked about that story anymore. So we spent 3 months living with the natives because we were in an airplane and we could land on their airstrips. And it was back in 1989 when the destruction of the rainforest was just happening.
Right.
So I think I have 17 hours of footage from the airplane and interviews on the ground and documenting the burning of the rainforest. That article did get into the Smithsonian. I did not write it. And then I made a film, a 25-minute documentary, which I would really like to go, that's been 30 years now. I'd like to go back and, do a follow-up because I have the footage. And we went to places that, not very many people had been to, even back in 1989, because we had an airplane.
Yeah, I had a cousin who was kind of an explorer, and he went down the Amazon, and he unfortunately contracted a disease there that plagued him the rest of his life. But it's a hostile environment.
Well, I remember I was 26 at the time, and I asked myself, kind of like, could I train a dog to save a life? I said, could my friend leave me here and I could survive here?
Right.
As a single white woman? And I went, nope. I would be gobbled up either by the natives or the bugs in about 3 days.
Yeah, you're right.
Right.
So what was there any one thing that stood out of everything you've done that you were most afraid of at the time?
Well, I'm going to reverse what you said. What I learned along the way.
Okay.
Actually, I learned this from what I call my Dominican mama. She was my mother's age, but she lived next door to me in Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. And when she was a young woman with 2 kids, she came to New York City, and raised these kids. And she was a hairdresser. So every day she was on the streets, and back in the 60s, it was rough.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, what can you tell me? And she goes, Sue, I'm going to tell you this. For the rest of your life, wherever you go, like, find the chief, find the person that's going to take care of you.
Oh,
and no one's going to mess with you. So she started paying the street people her tips, the bums, the beggars. And then after a while, they took care of my Dominican mama. right? And her kids. That was her community, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, fear used to be, I used to be plagued by fear traveling because I didn't have that one person looking out for me.
Got
And
it.
I learned as I travel now through life, and I've used this over the past 20 years. Like when I was in the hottest place on earth, when we were with the Afar warriors in Ethiopia and the Danakil Depression, I went up to the tribal leader who was going to travel with us, and through the interpreter, I said, "My mama has a request for you." And he's like, "What?" And my mama says that you need to take care of me and watch after me. And I said, "Will you do that for her?" And he goes, "Uh-huh, I will." And it worked.
I bet it did.
So that's a nice little tip,
Yes, great tip.
especially for people living in the city.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree. Yes. It's as true now as it ever has been.
Ah,
So of everywhere you've been, are there one or two places that are your absolute favorites that you've been to?
yes. Have you heard of the Kumbu in on the Everest Base Camp hike?
No, I'm afraid I haven't.
So you fly into like 9,000 feet, and it's the end of the road.
Okay.
So everything's on foot. So it's like walking back in time 200 years. There's the Tibetan yak herders, the bells. There's no cars, no motorcycles, no planes, and everything's on foot, and you just keep going higher and higher. But it's the little tea houses, the villages you stay at. So you're living with the Sherpa families,
Right.
um, sitting around a yak dung fire, getting pneumonia because the environment you're in. But it comes down to, my relationship with the locals. And um, when I usually go with a purpose and passion, right? So
Yeah.
I'm there to give back to them. And so it makes my trip even more rich.
Good.
Yeah, I never really go on vacation. I'm just a traveler, right? That's how I like to look at my life.
That's good. So is there a next quest or next something that you haven't started yet that's on the horizon?
Well, it's a great question. I might even ask you that, because as we age, what matters, what's important, what's that purpose? And I'm actually leaving in 2 weeks for a sailing trip,
Okay.
and getting back down to downsizing and living simply is really on my radar.
Okay.
Because look, we have all these books and things, and we're bound to them. And sailing is, or backpacking or bike riding is one way to, shed all that
Yes.
stuff away. So we can, for me, I feel like live a richer, fuller, healthier life.
Well, yeah, no, that's interesting. And I mean, uh, as you say, as we age, I mean, one of the things that I like about my life, and I think it's true of you and your life as well, is that I'm not letting age get in the way of my life, if you will. It's like some people, they age, they go, okay, nothing left, no challenges, nothing on the horizon, and I just don't feel that way.
Do you have anything left unfinished?
Um, I want to do a lot more writing. I'm writing the second book in the series right now. I'm writing stories for short story anthologies that are coming out over the next 2 years. I'm also personally, I'm a musician. I spent the majority of my life in the music industry, and I started recording and writing again. And I don't know if anything will ever happen with it, but it's immaterial. It's because I enjoy the activity.
Were you on tour or moving around with the whole music industry, or?
Yeah, I actually I started playing professionally when I was 14 in 1958, and I bought a electric bass guitar that was serial number 3, back in the day, and I was in rock bands, performing for about 14, 15 years. I was a record producer, and I co-wrote a science fiction rock opera that may in fact yet be coming back out again. I don't know, I don't want to make this about me. I started when I was 11 years old, and I wrote a sports newspaper that I sold to my neighbors. And I've never stopped either writing songs, music, or books since.
So like your stacks of material must be.
Yeah, except most of it's not books. I mean, I've contributed chapters to anthologies, and
Right.
the 𝐿 is my first novel, but I've written many, many newspaper columns, magazine columns, blogs, and things like that.
I was thinking like your diaries of all your information and your songs, and I mean, you must have volumes of notebooks and diaries or whatever you scribbled in.
I think the better way of putting it is I have a couple of file cabinets worth.
Yeah. Well, you know, it brings up my favorite all-time favorite movie is Almost Famous. You
Oh
must
yeah,
have.
I love that.
So yours is, you know, like you something's got to come from all that material. So don't
And it
get rid of
may,
it.
and it may. I mean,
Yeah.
let's see. When I was younger, and especially once the British invasion hit, if you will, the Beatles,
Mhm.
I wanted to be a rock and roll star. Unfortunately, I didn't have the voice to be a front singer, even though I did sing. And so I, quite a while ago, realized that if fame comes, but it's more important for me to enjoy what I'm doing and enjoy my life.
Yeah.
And the act of writing and doing is as much of a joy to me as people enjoying what I've written.
Yeah. It really talks about writer health. And I mean, that's like a whole nother thing I could talk about because I'm passionate about that. We have to find a balance. And
Mhm.
yeah, it can be a very sedentary, lonely thing. That's why critique groups or
Oh yeah.
having a coach is important.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, I also meditate, and I've been indulging over the last number of years in manifesting. I don't know. I just kind of like. I think life's an adventure, and you should grab it by the horns, shake it, and see what falls out, and try things.
I do have one more question for you.
Sure.
So what you are the director of new development at Blackstone. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, I'm a direct new yes, new
What does
business.
that mean? Tell us about that job description.
Oh, well, it means I kind of get involved in a lot of things that go on in the company. Um, I started with Blackstone in 2006 as a consultant. In fact, my wife and I started as consultants to Blackstone. She came out of the music industry. She was a senior executive in the music industry as I was. Then we both retired, moved from New York City to here. And I joined all sorts of nonprofit boards. And I just found that I was still a little bored, and that I had this knowledge built up over the years from New York business, if you will, that was
Right.
going to waste. And we got introduced by a friend of ours, owns the audio rights to Winnie the Pooh. And he came down here to license them to Blackstone. He stayed with Deborah and me, and he mentioned us to Craig Black, who owns Blackstone. We met for lunch. And Craig literally said, I have no idea what I'm going to do with the two of you, but I know you can add something to my company.
Oh,
And
sweet. Oh my God. That's
and
so
so we started consulting, and we were on the first board of directors. And my wife retired fully, and I stayed on and then joined the staff, if you will. And I've done things like we've bought other companies. I did I did the purchases. We've licensed our technology, and I've done that for the company. I've arranged distribution deals. I've kind of kick-started our film and TV efforts and things like that. I'm not the one running that, but I kickstarted them. And then kind of what happened was, I hope you don't mind me telling you this, but
Oh, I'm so fascinated. As long as you don't mind talking about it.
No, I don't.
No, that's good, because nobody's probably asked you this stuff.
No. What happened was one day the CEO came to me, Josh Stanton, who you probably know or met, and Josh said, I'd like to be able to get the audio rights to Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And I've been told that nobody's going to ever get them. And what do you think about trying? So I said, sure, I'm up for anything. You know, I was always good at research, and I was good at working with people. So I started interacting with his agent. I was told by many people in the industry, you're never going to get it. Well, it took me 2 years, but after 2 years, we finally got it. And then we got Pablo Neruda. And then basically I was not doing acquisitions, but Josh kept saying, well, you're good at this, so keep doing acquisitions. So I was doing all this other stuff that I was doing for the company, and I was starting to do some acquisitions work. Then one of our acquisitions people retired, and we had a shortage until we found a new one. So I got more involved with acquisitions. And then we decided to start the print and ebook part of our company. And so Josh said, can you kind of do what you did for the audio? And so I went out and I arranged for us to get PC Cast and Rex Pickett and the James Clavell catalog and the Gregory MacDonald, Fletch and Flynn catalogs, and kind of, helped jumpstart that.
Well, it's funny because in writing, probably one of the most important things for a writer is to get in and get out. Right? That's what you did. You get in and you get out. You have to do that in a scene. Every scene, you got to get in late and get out early.
Yeah.
So I like that, the way you roll.
Thanks. And then now I'm writing novels too. And, it's just like that was the next evolution in my writing process.
You probably have one of the best jobs on the planet, really.
I think so.
You created this amazing work for yourself, for sure.
And it's also, I will tell you, and I'm saying this because I believe it's true, Blackstone is an incredible culture and environment. I've worked in many corporations. I've worked in multi-billion-dollar corporations and startups and everything in between. And a lot of them talk about, we're a family, but they're really not. Blackstone really is a family. A lot of people that work there are related and are friends since high school. And it's like a sculling team. Everybody's pulling the oars in the same direction. It's the egos are in check, and that's just very rare.
I didn't tell you this. So I'm from, Montana, first time author, right? I've got my agent. I got my book is sold to Blackstone. And then they're like, well, you're going to Book Expo in New York City. Okay. I'm like, oh, cool. And I got a little, signing. So I get in my hotel. The next day I go to Book Expo. I get out of the cab. It's the Javits Center.
Yeah.
There's only 6 book banners on the front of the Javits Center. And I get out and one of them's mine.
Yes.
But nobody even told me. I'm like, are you guys kidding me? I made, I was next to, I forgot the name. A famous writer, like his cover was up there. I'm like, I can't believe nobody told me those stinkers.
Well, there's sometimes it's good to have a surprise. And I remember that. I was there and I remember seeing your banner. So.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, wow. So that was fun. Yeah, like that was it was the red carpet treatment. I brought my 60-something-year-old writing mentor with me. I call her my midwife. She kind of helped me birth my book. And she always dreamed of that would happen to her, or she would be on the other side, and she would be in New York City in the publishing industry. So I invited her because, we just, the friendships through the writing process. And her and I shared my hotel room, and we had the best time. And she was so gracious and grateful, because she got to go everywhere I got to go. And without her being there, it would have never been the same. And she felt like she was a queen for like 3 days.
Which is great. That's really nice that you can give that to someone else.
Because, you know, you guys in the business are used to it, right?
I don't know. I don't know that I ever get used to it.
Yeah.
You know, it's just very cool. So is there anything else you would like to impart to authors before we end this today, or anything else you'd like to say about it? Anything that I haven't asked you where you go, you should have asked me that?
Well, here's some nuggets. There's really 4 things you need to do if you want to write. You
Okay.
need to read a lot, write a lot, hang out with writers, and study your craft.
Amen.
Boop.
Well, thank you, Susan. I've
Yeah, that's
enjoyed
great.
it.